DigiMarCon Midwest. Ryan Brock, your host here again, and I am joined here by Scott Fenstermaker. He is the Vice President of Digital Marketing at Risk Connect down in Atlanta, Georgia. And Scott's here to play Mythbusters with us this afternoon. Scott, thanks for joining
Ryan,
us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so I'm really intrigued by your presentation concept that you're going to be giving later, because I think it's something that is true to my heart. You know, looking at some of what we know about digital marketing, what we take for granted, what we assume is really important but isn't. It sounds like you're going to be really taking a lens to some stuff that might not really matter, some myths that we might face in digital marketing. Tell me about how you arrived at some of these myths.
Well, it's very interesting. Digital marketing, you might say, is one of the hardest places to actually find good information, because the digital marketers are the ones producing it, right? So you can get into a situation where you're myth, SEO is dead. It's a myth that SEO is dead. Everybody's writing about how the channel that they serve, the product that they put out is alive and well and not dead. And if it were actually dead, you would never be able to tell, because of all of the content people are producing to the contrary.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle. But we're all digital marketers and good at what we do, right? And so my goal today is to bring some conversations where we have a chance to apply some kind of critical thinking to some of the situations of digital marketing where we might think that there's an easy button connotation to it, or there's a fad connotation to it, and really kind of step back and take a look at it and make sure that it's factual.
Well, I mean, I can think of a million fads, a million easy buttons that I'm hearing about today. Rather than lead the witness, I'll just ask you, what do you think is the biggest one? And it's okay if you don't say AI. See what I did there? I led the witness anyway.
You led me right into AI. Yeah. Let's talk about Gen AI for a second. So Gen AI has already a ton of legitimate and wonderful uses in marketing and content marketing and everything, but it also has limitations to where it doesn't do everything. And one of the pressures that you get when you work with the CMO and when you work with leadership is to say, okay, your team is small. I only have so much budget for a team. How can you use these tools to increase what you produce, content, for example, without increasing headcount, right? So as a substitute for people, use these relatively inexpensive tools to get your output. And there are legitimate uses for these tools, but maybe quickening the cadence of high quality content is not necessarily one of them.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I feel like we're finally at a point where most of the other talking heads that I know in the industry anyway are on the same page. That hey, if you think you have an easy button, you don't. And I agree with that. The way that I would frame it, maybe I'd be interested in your take on this, is more like, if everybody has the same easy button, now you're just going to be behind if you're not figuring out how to use it correctly. It's not the thing that's going to get you ahead, but maybe the baseline has changed and we all need to keep up. But how we keep up is not necessarily set in stone yet, I don't think, with AGI. Not AGI, AI.
I don't think so either. I think people are still figuring out how it incorporates, and at the same time, AI is changing so fast that how it incorporates today is not how it incorporates 2 months from now, right? So there's going to be a Wild West atmosphere. There is a Wild West atmosphere to that, just like with any innovation. But the pressure coming down from leadership is going to be one of substituting human beings for something in some context, either slowing hiring. That's just what leadership wants. It was the same way when email and web was introduced. It's like, okay, how can we use this for productivity such that we don't need as much manpower, right? And there are some instances where you can say, okay, maybe we can gain productivity in that way, but productivity gains are not just productivity gains universally. And there are some places where there still is no substitute for a human being doing those particular jobs. And so that's a point of friction that is not going to get resolved anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, for where we sit right now, I would argue that the best deployed AI tools are the ones that work within the context of a human being. I mean, I personally can expedite parts of my process, or I can automate rote and repetitive stuff that I have to do to free myself up for other things. But if I were to just replace me altogether with that AI, it's not going to get the same results.
It's very interesting. Let's take content marketing, for example. So many wonderful uses for this from an automation standpoint, but a lot of the best uses for it I found are on the front end. So things like strategy, content missions, some kinds of research, optimization, gap analysis. These things that come right ahead. But it's interesting. Some of those uses constitute analyses that might not necessarily have been done heretofore, right? Like you might not have been doing it. You get to do more analysis, so you get deeper content, you get more resonant content, more thorough content, but maybe not necessarily faster content output. So my goal is, let me step back. Whenever we've tried to get this in any kind of a hybrid model towards content production, like outlining or maybe first drafting or something like that, it has backfired spectacularly so far with me and my writing team. Because it takes more time to unravel the stuff that we don't want from that kind of output and redo it and do it more thoroughly than it would have been. It's like having a well-meaning but neophyte intern doing the first draft, right?
Yeah, right.
It's just not, in our particular niche, it's quicker to let the content person just write.
Yeah, and I found that thinking about a tool like that as an intern has been helpful for me. Like, I know this is not what good reporters do. Okay, I'm going to admit that. But if I'm writing, let's say, a presentation for a conference like this, and I'm trying to make a point, and I know there's data out there that backs that point up, rather than wasting hours of my time going through all of the usual suspects, the reports, the publishers that are going to have that data, I can just ask the AI to find it. It's equivalent to having someone take the time to go out and do it. It's just I don't have to do that.
Yes.
Again, not the most honest journalism probably to find the source that fits my pre-existing perspective, but it's things like that I found. Okay, now I'm suddenly able to do things faster, but the actual production of the content itself, not so much. Okay, so I'm sick and tired of talking about AI even though I'm the one that brought it up. So let's talk about a different myth, something you don't have to spoil your whole presentation, but totally different angle. What's another myth that you've busted along your career?
Let's talk. You just mentioned cherry picking data, perhaps, and coming about. So there's a lot of circular citations in what we do, right? So I found a lot of statistics about paid influencer marketing, right? About returns on that, and you would get these numbers like 6.5x, so $6.50 back for every dollar spent, right? But wherever I kept seeing that figure again and again and again, and I realized that all the content I was reading about it was citing one another, right? So it was kind of circular
finding that original,
So when you find the original stuff, you realize that what they're doing, I don't want to get too into statistics here, but they study these things, right? They study influencer marketing and find out what the return is. And then they report an average return that uses, without getting too far into this, it uses a mean average metric. So they add it all up and divide it by the number of points, and that's how they get the 650. And then they draw a figure out of the 650 per dollar spent, and that's what they report. And then they just talk about that.
And then other people are like, okay, now we can claim this is real.
But it's interesting when you see different averages. If you took the median of that data, for example, which is a more accurate way to reflect it, the return is much lower.
Yeah,
it's like $1.06. It's to the point where it's very close to break even, and you might be underwater on the investment. So without anybody lying to anybody or acting in bad faith, people are still getting wretched information. And you actually have to go in and look at some of these studies that are producing these types of information to see, nobody has misrepresented this, but it's still wrong information. If I based my investment decisions based on, I think I'm getting $6.50 back or $8.50 back for every dollar, and I'm getting $1.50 in reality.
Yeah,
that's a terrible business decision on my part.
Well, and I would argue that probably somewhere along the way in that chain, someone has misrepresented the information. The way that I just described me occasionally finding that statistic I want because I know it supports my claim, I don't go any farther than that. I don't go any deeper to verify it. And so, because I'm trying to accomplish a certain goal and change your mind about something, I use this statistic, this little nugget of authority, right? And I say, okay, trust me on this. If I really cared about accurate reporting and not changing your mind, I would treat that data differently. So that's really fascinating.
I mean, there's an awful lot of trust. I mean, digital marketers are a great group of people. We trust one another. We build off, like conferences like this one, we build off each other's word, and we try and take the next step with it. And I'm not trying to be too contrarian here, but I am trying to introduce kind of just a level of critical thinking on some of these things that have a lot of attention, a lot of flash, to maybe take one step back and say, is what I'm seeing real?
Yeah.
Or do I have a fine enough distinction on what I think something will do or produce?
Yes.
And that's the thing.
Yeah. Yesterday, I spoke with a gentleman from Be Found Online, Kyle, and he talked about cookieless future. They're talking about,
you know, it's a big deal.
You don't need cookies, and it's going to be fine. And either way, however long it takes for cookies to completely go away, if ever. The point that he's making, that they're making, and it's our MC Steve is making as well, is that the sooner you move to collecting your own data, you know, on people who are engaging with your own website, your own digital properties, the less you're gonna care about cookies, the less you're gonna care about what happens there. And I think that that seems to be sort of in line spiritually anyway with what you're talking about. Like I've been thinking a lot lately about how, as a marketer, I have access to a group of users and customers and people that I could draw my own conclusions from. I think what we're going to find moving forward is that those individuals who can come forth and say, I have a direct line into this information, I have run my own study, I don't have to rely on that quote that's been quoted and photocopied 1,000 times. I have something new to bring to the table. I think not only is that good for just everybody, for consumers and everything, but I think that even from an SEO standpoint, bringing that new data forward is going to be a good way to build authority. So starting to figure out how you can control your own narrative by doing your own research and figuring out your own information. Some of that sounds a little bit like conspiracy theory nut language, but the point I'm making is marketers doing that is a really healthy thing.
I want to do you one better on that. So yes, I believe that, and that's absolutely true. Last thing on that point, though, there's an extent to which the more qualitative and individual and tedious task of actually asking, for example, asking your customers what influenced them one by one, and taking the time to do that kind of in-depth but very micro research is much more helpful than trying to what we normally do, which is hide behind data as much as we can. So I've got my CRM, I've got my web data and so forth. I'm going to sit back behind my computer and try and infer what is going on. So not only collecting first-person data like you're talking about, but actually doing the hard work of asking people, the old school work of interviewing buyers, people who almost bought from you, your prospects. What motivated you to move? What motivated you to move now? What was your needs? One at a time. That is going to get you much more clarity than anything more novel and data-focused and sterile sitting behind a computer screen, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense to me. All right, well, Scott, Fenstermaker, where can people find you online if they want to learn more or connect with you?
So, like my friend Rob earlier, I have a hard last name, but first name, last name. So Scott Fenstermaker, which is FensterMaker.com. ScottFenstermaker.com is for finding me. I'm with a company called Risk Connect. We are a B2B firm that helps companies with all manner of corporate risk to keep their operations smooth sailing and operating for a good, healthy, long time. That is Risk Connect, RISKONNECT.com.
Scott, it was a pleasure. Great conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me. And we'll be back with another guest here soon. Thanks, everybody.